Welcome back to Spooky Stories. For the next 10 days leading up to Halloween, I'll be sharing spooky stories, but not always spooky, from books within the collections at Seton Hall University, along with the strange and sometimes just downright weird of collections. I hope you enjoy. It is day 5 of Spooky Stories, and this is the case of the Countess Hilda Von Breber. It was rather too bad that just now, when his mind was harassed with misgivings at home, he should also be bothered with disturbances outside his own home. But so it was. Events of an unprecedented nature were taking place in this town, and it fell to his lot to cope with them. Night after night, children, mostly of the poorer class, disappeared, and despite frantic yet careful and thorough searches, no clue as to what had befallen them had, so far, been discovered. The Count doubled the men on night duty, but in spite of these and other extraordinary precautions, the disappearances continued, and the affair, already of the utmost gravity, promised to be one that would prove disastrous, not merely to the heads of families, but to the head of the police himself. So long as the missing ones had been of the lower orders only, the Count had not much to fear. The murmurings of their parents could easily be held in check. But now that a few of the children of the rich had been spirited away, there was every likelihood of the matter reaching the ears of the court. One evening, when the Count had hardly recovered from his equanimity after a stormy interview with Herr Meichen, the banker, whose 3-year-old daughter had vanished, and a still more distressing scene from Otto Schmidt, the lawyer, whose 6-year-old daughter had disappeared, his patience was called upon to undergo a still further trial in consequence of a visit from General Karl Rittenberg, a person of the greatest importance, not only in the town, but in the whole province. Purple in the face with suppressed fury, the general burst into the room where the head of the police sat. "Count!" he cried, striking the table with his fist. "This is beyond a joke. My child, my only child, Elizabeth, whom my wife and I passionately love, has been stolen. She was walking by my side in Frederick Street this afternoon. As it suddenly became foggy, I left her for a moment to hail a vehicle to take us home. I wasn't gone from her more than half a minute at the most, but when I returned, she had gone. I searched everywhere, shouting her name, and passers-by, compassionate strangers, joined me in my search. But though we have looked high and low, not a trace of her have we been able to discover. I have not told her mother yet. God help me, I dare not. I dare not even show my face at home without her. My wife will never forgive me." And so great was his emotion that he buried his face in his hands, and his great body heaved and shook. Then he started to his feet, his eyes bulging and lurid. "Curse you!" he shrieked. "Curse you, Count! It's all your fault. Day after day you've sat here, when you ought to have been hunting up these rascally police of yours. You've no right to rest 1 second, not 1 second, do you hear? Till the mystery surrounding these poor lost children have been cleared up, living or dead. God forbid it should prove to be the latter. They are restored to their parents. Now mark my words, Count, unless my child Elizabeth is found, I'll make your name a byword throughout the length and breadth of this country. But the words failed him, and shaking his fist, he staggered out of the room. The Count was much perturbed. The general was one of the few people in town who had really had it in their power to do him harm. The one man above all others with whom he had hitherto made it his business to keep in. He had not the least doubt but that the general meant all he said, and he recognized only too well that his one and only hope of salvation lay in the recovery of Elizabeth. But, God in heaven, where could he look for her? Sick at heart, he marshaled every policeman in the force, and within an hour every street in Magdeburg was being subject to a most rigorous search. The Count was just quitting his office, resolved to join the hunt himself, when a shabbily dressed woman brushed past the custodian at the door, and racing up to him, flung herself at his feet. "What the devil does she want?" the Count demanded savagely. "Who is she?" "Martha Brokel, Your Honor. A poor, half-witted creature who was one of the first in the town to lose a child," the door porter replied. "And the shock of it has driven her mad." "Mad, mad, yes! That is just what I am, mad," the woman broke out. "Everything is in darkness. It is always night. There is no houses, no chimneys, no lanterns, only trees, big, black trees that rustle in the wind and shake their heads mockingly. And then something hideous comes. What is it? Take it away, take it away. Give her back to me." And as Martha's voice rose to a shriek, she threw her hands over her head and, clenching them, growled and snarled like a wild animal. "Put her outside," the Count said, with an impatient gesture, "and take good care she does not get in here again." "No! Don't turn me away! Don't!" Martha screamed. "I forgot what it was I wanted to tell you, but I remember now. I've seen it. Seen the thing that stole my child. There is light. Light again! Oh, hear me!" "Where have you seen it, Martha?" the porter inquired. And looking at the Count, he said respectfully, "It is just possible, Your Honor, this woman might be of use to us, and that she has actually seen the person who stole her child." "Rubbish! What right has she to have children?" the Count snapped, and he spurned the supplicant with his boot. The moment she was in the street, however, the head of the police was after her. Keeping close behind her, he resolutely dogged her steps. The evening was now far advanced, and the fog so dense that the Count, though he knew the city, was soon at a total loss as to his whereabouts. But on and on the woman went, now deviating to the right, now to the left, sometimes pausing as if listening, then tearing on again at such a rate that the Count was obliged to run to keep up with her. Suddenly she uttered a shrill cry. "There it is! There it is! The thing that took my child!" And the figure of what certainly appeared to be a woman, muffled and carrying a sack on her shoulder, glided across the road just in front of them and disappeared into the impenetrable darkness. Martha sped after her, and the Count, his hopes raised high, followed in hot pursuit. He failed to recognize the ground which they were traversing, and presently they came to a high wall over which Martha scrambled with the agility of an acrobat. The Count, in attempting to imitate her, damaged his knee and tore his clothes, but he also landed safely on the other side. Then on they went, Martha with unabated energy, the Count horribly exhausted, and beginning to think of turning back, when they were abruptly brought to a standstill. The walls of some building loomed right ahead of them. The object of their pursuit, again visible, darted through a doorway, whilst Martha, with a loud cry of triumph, sprang in after her. But before the Count could cross the threshold, the door was slammed and locked in his face. Then he heard a chorus of the most appalling sounds so strange and unearthly that his blood turned to ice and his hair rose straight on end. Rushing footsteps mingled with a peculiar soft patterings, and agonized human screams coupled with the growls and snappings of an animal. A heavy thud, gurgles, and then silence. The Count's courage revived. He hurled himself against the door. It gave with a crash, and the next moment he was inside. But what a sight met his eyes! The place, which somehow or the other seemed oddly familiar to him, was a veritable shambles. Floor, walls, and furniture were sodden with blood. In every corner were mangled human remains, while stretched out on the ground, opposite the doorway, lay the body of Martha, her face unrecognizable, and her breast and stomach ripped right open. This was terrible enough, but the more terrible by far was the author of it all, who, having cast aside wraps, now stood fully revealed in the yellow glow of a lantern. What the Count saw was a monstrosity, a thing with a woman's breast, a woman's hair, golden and curly, but the face and feet were those of a wolf, whilst the hands, white and slender, were armed with long, glittering nails, cruelly sharp and dripping with blood. To the Count's astonishment, the creature did not attack him, but uttering a low, plaintive cry, veered around and endeavored to escape. But escape was the very last thing Von Breber would permit. Whatever the thing was, beast or devil, it had caused him endless trouble, and if allowed to get away now, would go on with its endless escapades and so bring about his ruin. No, he must kill it. Kill it even at the risk of his own life. With a shout of wrath, he plunged his sword up to its hilt in the thing's back. It fell to the floor, and the Count bent over it curiously. Something was happening, something strange and terrifying, but he could not look. He was forced to shut his eyes. When he opened them, he no longer saw the hairy visage of a wolf. He was gazing fondly into the dying eyes of his beautiful and much beloved wife. With a rapidity like lightning, he recognized his surroundings. He was in a long, disused summer house that stood in the remote corner of his own grounds. "God help me and you too," the Countess Hilda whispered, clasping him fondly in her arms. "It was the water I drank in the Harz Mountains. I have been bewitched." And, kissing him feverishly on the lips, she sank back, dead. Now, this story comes from an ebook from Hathi Trust called Werewolves by Elliot O'Donnell. It was published in London by Methuen in 1912. And as I said, it is an ebook. It's not actually a physical book from the collections, but you can still access it through the Seton Hall catalog. For those who may not be able to access it through the Seton Hall catalog, you can just access it online through Project Gutenberg. So if you tuned in and listened last year, you'll remember a rather gruesome tale from the same book, also about werewolves. And this year, I decided to bring it back for the other werewolf tale. There's other ones as well from different countries, but there was another one from Germany as well. It's not as gruesome, but still pretty dark, and as I said, from Germany again. Because honestly, who knows what's lurking in the Black Forest, or, in this case, the mountains of northern Germany. Now, an interesting fact that I've recently learned in preparing this episode is werewolf trials, and that how werewolf trials swept through Europe during the 5th, 16th, and 17th centuries. Now, of course, I was familiar with witch trials and even, something like vampire hunts and superstitions where they'd encase the grave in a cage, among other things, especially for vampires. But werewolf trials were actually very new to me. I've never heard of them before. Like the witch trials, werewolf trials were driven by superstition, religious and political clashes, and the desire to find a scapegoat. Now, in many cases, accusations of being a werewolf were closely tied to witchcraft. So essentially, a person was most likely accused of being both. They were both a werewolf and a witch. And many of the accused were beggars, hermits, or emigres. They weren't part of the established community. And some of the punishments were rather gruesome, and if you guessed it, especially in Germany. One of the most famous tales, not tales, but records, is from 1589. So in 1589, executioners strapped accused werewolf Peter Stump to a cartwheel, removed his skin with hot pincers, and then chopped off his head before burning his body at the stake. Stump's head was also attached to a wooden pole carved into the likeness of a wolf and was later displayed as a warning to others tempted to consort with the devil. Now, there are other records that are, also dark, but this one was the darkest and most gruesome and is actually probably one of the first records you'll see if you look up werewolf trials yourself. You might also remember Elliot O'Donnell from last year. If you're not, I'll go through who he was again. He is quite an interesting author in that he claimed to have seen a ghost in his bedroom when he was just 5 years old. Then again, as a student in Dublin, he claimed to have seen a hand emerge from behind a curtain in a friend's lodgings, and later encountered a phantom in Plymouth. That would have been about a decade later, I think, from his claim when he saw the hand in Dublin. He was originally going to enter the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst to join the Royal Irish Constabulary, but instead he traveled to the United States, working on a cattle range in Oregon, and became a policeman during the Chicago Railway Strike of 1894. He then returned to London, or England, and worked as a schoolmaster. He even trained for theatre in London at the Henry Neville Studio, Oxford Street, and then he served in the British Army in World War I and later acted on stage and in movies. But ultimately, he became an author and an authority on all supernatural affairs, solving alleged ghost issues, even lecturing on paranormal matters. Well, that is it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in. And that is it for today's episode of Spooky Stories. If you have enjoyed Spooky Stories, be sure to share and follow us on social media at SHU_libraries. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, and remember, the library holds more than just books. Some stories may linger long after the lights go out.